Rolling.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this edition of the End Time Tribune, this June the 30th, 2018. It is good to be back with you. Brian and I have been busy doing just a plethora of other things. Everything's being switched over. Of course, we've switched over from the BTR iTunes feed to a new feed. Brian's established new feed. He has established the bands of time so he can get back to working on his archaeochronology stuff and archaeogenetic stuff. We also have an aggregate that he's put together, End Time Tribune Media. So I know I said I was going to do that today, Brian, but I am going to put up a little 15-minute broadcast on the BTR feed to let everybody know where it is that we have gone to. So, ladies and gentlemen, wow, the status of the planet. We've got a lot of things to cover tonight. Brian has been checking out the geopolitical stuff, and I just have not had time switching over to a more expanded format like we had in the very beginning. So we're going to be covering a whole lot of different things. I've also got a footnote for today. Brian was a little upset with me the other day. He took umbrage at some of the things that I said. I interrupted him a few times. And make no mistakes about it, ladies and gentlemen, I met no foul language in Brian's department. That was not intended at all. So I don't know if anybody took that the wrong way, but if so, it's retracted. He took me back. I think he told me it was the 20-minute mark in the last broadcast that it seemed like that I had insinuated that we had went away from the other topics and the other work because of him. No, that's not true. We go where I want. And any of the other stuff, I always ask him first. So I didn't mean to insinuate on that last broadcast that it had anything to do with him, because it did not at all. So we're going to let Brian take a shot here in the beginning. I'm going to look over some new stuff. So I do know there's tons of geopolitical stuff going on. It's just I haven't been right on top of it. So Brian, you have the mic for a few minutes while I get some links up here. I know that I wanted to talk about some weather events, but you've got the mic here for a few.
All right, try to jump into this a little bit. That's just it, folks. I've been real sporadic with watching the news because obviously we've got a few things we're working here on in the background. So, I mean, let's see. Which area do we start in first? I mean, one thing to point out that I've noticed that is the most standout, I don't know that I want to use the word theme, but to a degree, I think it kind of does boil down to that, because we talked about in the past that we have definitely had clear-cut markers that 3 of the riders have gone out. We know full well with the White Horse, with nationalism going out, was I fell right on the day that day before, a day after, actually, that the new commander-in-chief in the United States was brought in to office in the inauguration. Second one we had happen fall on the day that the Charlottesville protests broke out. And then the third one was the day that Donald Trump announced the steel and the other trade tariffs, steel and aluminum tariffs, basically. And then obviously, we've had a full-fledged trade war go into place since that time. Now, as I've explained on other programs, but for those that aren't familiar with our other episodes, I'll state it again. No, America is not the key element in Bible prophecy, but you have to understand that as far as America being concerned, who they are as an end-time player, they're key critical in assisting in the work of four riders, the craftsmen of Zechariah. And this is where things are headed as we speak. We've seen these things slowly boiling to a head here for quite some time, but now in the last 2 weeks, it's really gotten to the point where it's getting out of control. You have got nonstop migration and immigration talks that are happening all throughout the European bloc. We know full well on top of it that the eastern section of Europe specifically has been getting embroiled in nationalism for the last couple of years. We've had things going on between Poland, Austria-Hungary, which is now obviously Hungary, but, don't take the others out of the mix. We've had major developments going on here with Italy, with this new group that's been brought into power that is also towing the nationalist line. And of course, on the other end of the spectrum, you have Germany and France trying to sort of counterbalance what's going on with this nationalist ideology that's coming to the forefront. Now, another thing that's not commonly spoken of, but I think everybody sort of picked up on the fact of what I'm about to say concerning the Brexit, became real apparent when Nigel Farage went out and had a debate with the ex-president of Mexico where he stated that nationalism was a good thing. And it was a big conference where they bickered back and forth about which form of governing was better. Now, I have been told specifically by people in the UK that the reason the Brexit happened, and I'm just going to quote their words directly, folks, the Brexit happened because, as they told me, we're a bunch of racists. And we had covered this things leading up to that when we did a video on the Bands of Time YouTube channel called Rise of the Crusaders. And you could see these elements were already happening there in Britain. But now as we've progressed forward here to this point, for instance, BBC would come up a couple of times when I went to pull up one of my programs for streaming here. And all that was going on in the background that they were talking about is immigration and the migrant crisis. That's all we're seeing being talked about in the United States at this point on a continual basis here as well. So this is forefront and center, and you can't escape that this is boiling to a head. Now, when you consider on top of it as well, when you take the contrast between the white horse and the red horse, this last week alone, there was a good 20 to 30 articles released on the fact that America's on the brink of civil war. Some are stating this is not a quote-unquote violent civil war, that it is only going to be fought through intellectual means, but at the same time, there's another growing thread within this. And we already know that we have the threat of the fascist versus the anti-fascist. That has been, blatantly at the forefront. But I have seen people, nonviolent people within the left side, suddenly state that the only way to fight back against people with weapons is to use weapons yourself. So that becomes very bothersome when you look at that. And, well, I don't know how to state it. Maybe I just shouldn't. But you can see so many of these different threads are continuing to just boil over. I don't recall that story off the top of my head, so I'll move into a different direction. Economically speaking, this trade war is in full force at this point in the United States. The amount of sanctions that are being dropped on this nation and that nation is completely unbelievable. We had pretty much at the G7 meeting that happened here in Canada recently, I believe it was Canada, we had our commander-in-chief basically slapped everybody in the face and walked out the door. This, in turn, has set a whole chain of events in motion. And this last week, the markets were continuing to plummet nonstop. China, they turn around and launch massive tariffs against them, which to a degree, some people knew this was coming, but they didn't know to what extent. That has been going back and forth, and there was talks that happened a while back and all of that. And then, of course, the infamous one that I had warned about this weeks before it even happened, as things were leading up to these talks in North Korea, that I wasn't even paying attention to it. I couldn't even take it seriously. And here's why. It's a twofold reason. Well, we know full well, especially after this current administration trampled all over the agreement that was made concerning the nuclear weapons program in Iran. Obviously, North Korea is going to look at that and go, can we trust them? But that's almost besides the point, because the actual relevant part of this is that multiple reports now in the last couple of days, one coming out of Reuters, another out of I-24, and of course, everybody usually takes their stories from Reuters or AFP anyways, start circulating that it appears that North Korea is beginning to build its nuclear weapons again, and they're building up in the varied production facilities. Are showing a massive increase in work and everything else. Now, this is something I've stated privately here in my home many times, that this move with North Korea as such is opening a door that is very dangerous. And why do I say that? Well, folks, you have to understand there was a string of events that were going on throughout the Middle East where most certainly Syria had chemical weapon material brought to them and nuclear weapon material brought to them by North Korea. They caught the boat coming through up from Cairo, was where they figured out where the ships were coming through, and the material was getting into their hands. Now, we know full well after Netanyahu finally released to the public, which has actually been out there in books that have brought forward people within the Mossad or interviews with people in the Mossad, and varied records have already stated this anyways, that they had taken out a nuclear weapons facility in Syria some time back. Well, you whip the rewind button around and you find out on top of it as well that North Korea was bringing these things over to Iran. They were also bringing them to Gaddafi in Libya. And this is a continual threat. I mean, we've had North Koreans that fought against Israel in some of the wars on their soil. So this North Korea thing already was a bit of a dangerous move, but now we're seeing that this peace deal apparently looks to be as if it's hanging on a thread. And that's what I'm going to bring up for the time. Bring you in for a second here, Matthew.
Well, in the midst of all this, people have probably been missing some of the major news items that's at play, especially the weird weather. I mean, this is the fact of the matter. I mean, June 25th, they had a major cold outbreak, almost 8 inches in the Alps. And there's states of emergency being declared. Northern California, fire is raging again. Of course, we've had such severe flooding in northern Vietnam that 21 people have been killed so far. Severe thunderstorms in the U.S. Well, just yesterday, there was at least 200,000 people without power. So it's just amazing to me when you take a look at even what's going in Florida. Literally a 300-pound fish washing up near Fort Myers. Some of the Goliath groupers, like I said, they were over 300-pounders. And literally thousands of fish just washing up on the beaches. When you do a scan for this, it's coming up everywhere. A fish kill at Lake of the Ozarks. Sacramento, what caused all the deaths? Look, dead fish everywhere in Warrior Lake. And you keep looking and you keep looking. Lake Winnebago, hundreds of dead fish. It's getting to be amazing, but sometimes I look to the other side of things and take note that we're beginning to tip the scales here, and marine biologists know it, because the jellyfish are exploding in populations. And this has really got everybody concerned, because they know there's only one reason for this. All the fish that are supposed to be eating the jellyfish are dead. And that's just the fact of the matter. Now, we haven't been covering at all what has been going on in Hawaii. But this is, this is pretty serious. 7,000 earthquakes of magnitude 2.5 or higher have battered Hawaii just in June. And, of course, everybody's been told about the massive lava flows that has been burning all the buildings. But, I mean, it takes some shock when you really look into what's going on in Hawaii. It's not good, and it doesn't appear that this is going away anytime soon. Now, the USGS is already talking about the next summit explosion, and they have no idea. They have absolutely no idea what to look for, because this is absolutely unprecedented. I mean, they are, of course, trying to keep the public calm. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is completely unprecedented, having 7,000 earthquakes just in June of 2.5 or higher. I don't know what they're hoping for, but look, ladies and gentlemen, the Hawaii Civil Defense stepped in and said that the gas emissions from the fissures were very high. Now, with that in mind, let's turn to Alaska. Thousands of dead seabirds washing up the Alaskan coast for the fourth year in a row. Officials are now starting to come out and say flat out that the west coast of the U.S. is dying. Now, it's one thing when you have a reporter talk about this stuff. It's an entirely different matter when you have marine biologists screaming at the top of the lungs, we need to do something. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out something is extremely wrong. It's just the amount of data is too much. It's too overwhelming for me to cover in just one diatribe. But, ladies and gentlemen, nothing is good. Nothing is good. Look, this is crazy. Okay, everybody is well aware it's the end of June. And it's been released that there's going to be a heat wave up by the Great Lakes. The only problem with that is the U.S. Coast Guard has come out and warned everybody not to swim because the water in the Great Lakes is too cold. Now, you have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that when the temperatures are expected to be in the 90s, a 20-degree temperature differential between the water and the ambient air temperature, if it is over that threshold of 20 degrees, when you jump in, when you jump into really cold water, it can give you a heart attack, of course, especially if you're older. but it can quickly lead to hypothermia in people who are perfectly healthy. And it's the end of June. It's the end of June. How can the water temperature in the Great Lakes possibly still be 77 degrees? It's not, the equations are not equal, ladies and gentlemen. Things are not in the balance anymore. And this is absolutely not going to get any better. It's just not. Now, I have one serious bit of news that I would like to talk about. Before then, I guess I need to talk about especially the situation that's going on in Phoenix, just released yesterday. What is killing birds around Phoenix? It's gotten old in Phoenix. People keep seeing birds sick, birds dead. And at the end of the day, they have no idea what's causing it. You know, this is a quote from the article. A spokesperson said it's basically the one sick on a plane phenomenon. They're thinking that all of the birds come to one place to get their water or some other resource, and something is poisoning it. At least that's what they're hoping, that it's some type of poison. You know, the fish kill in Alaska is also accompanied 2 days earlier on the 27th. They put a big article up, so they keep separating the articles so you're not getting that it's fish and bird kills. But June 27th, dead seabirds are being found washed ashore in Alaska. And ladies and gentlemen, they keep, well, there's this one article here that I didn't choose to look at, but I know they're lying right off the top. It says that the reason they insinuated in the title was known. It says the reason that they're dying has been determined. When that's a lie. You keep reading, it says the cause behind the die-off has scientists investigating further into the pattern. The results come back pretty quickly. Currently, they determined the cause of death that appears to be due to starvation. Ladies and gentlemen, starvation. All these birds have starved to death. Now, think, ladies and gentlemen, go back in your mind 10 years. We got serious problems in the Pacific Ocean. And things are not going to get any better anytime soon. Brian, back to you.
All right, sorry about that. You caught me away from a computer. Well, I just did. I mean, I'm taking a look at over some of the other events that have been happening here. But, you know, folks, we've been sort of leading up to certain odds and ends in the crucible, and some of these things are breaking out in real time. Over the course of the last few days here, protests started up in Iran, close to the Iraqi border, and I do have to state I find that a little bit peculiar of the placement where these protests are at. And of course, when they started as well, Netanyahu and Mike Pompeo and the current administration in the United States all are jumping for joy, hoping this is going to start leading towards regime change. And I mean, even John Bolton, that's his atypical standout thing that he's still calling for to happen inside of Iran. Now, as we had discussed in the last episode of The Crucible that we did, right now, with what just happened in the election in Iraq, with Sadr being the top candidate that took the win in that election and his connections to the Iranian regime, which, you know, this has been a back and forth, because there were those that stated he's not aligned with that regime any longer. He's a Shiite, but he's not friendly with Iran. And this was a great thing, according to some analysts, even though I'd say very few recognize the fact that this is very dangerous and that people aren't aware of who he is. he led an army inside of Iraq called the Army of Mahdi, which had stirred up mass sectarian fighting and attacks on the United States forces while they were occupying Iraq. And, it led towards one of the bloodiest parts of America's invasion of Iraq. And, it's kind of like history almost going full circle here, as it should. Him ending up on the top here was not coincidence. And we had another party, of course, which is 100% pro-Iran. Not to even mention on top of it, there's a Hezbollah party in there that is at the forefront. And, a few weeks back, I caught a program on Vice News that was talking about that very specific election before it had happened. And they even stated right in there that through the leader of Iraq before the election, he stated that it very well looks like America is going to end up launching a proxy war in Iraq on Iran. And he stated if this thing happens, it's going to be the destruction of what remains of that nation. So this is already something of high concern at that time. And all of a sudden now when you have these outbursts and these protests, and I mean, of course, they're protesting legitimate concerns because we know full well that the rial has been collapsing, that even when they got the sanctions lifted with Obama's nuclear deal that they did, the money was still not being brought into the population, and they're still living in a state of poverty in many of these areas. And obviously the big concern by a vast majority of the at least Western nations is the fact that they are indeed kicking a lot of that funding out into these varied wars and not to even backing all of these different groups all throughout the world. And this is another thing to take note of, and we pointed this out time and time again, folks. Don't get caught up in the Shia-Sunni divide, because quite some time back that fiction was put to an end. The Iranian regime had ties with Al-Qaeda, and that's sort of to a degree important when you consider what's happening in Syria as well, but I'm going to get back to that. But we've seen this twofold event playing out here between Iran and Iraq, which is, technically speaking, is only a border that was drawn into effect with the Sykes-Picot agreement. And, of course, you have the Kurds caught right in the midst of all of this because they're right on the border area in the midst of Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Syria. And that's going to be very important in the way things play out here in the future. But now there's been accusations within Iraq's election, obviously, that there was corruption within the election process. And finally, that recount that they've been calling for is about to go into effect. It might have even went into effect already. I saw the story, I believe, earlier today on Reuters that they were calling for the recount already. So where that heads, nobody knows. But I mean, take note of the fact that a group of people had broken into where the voting machines were stored at and started a fire where those machines were at. And that's got basically fishy written all over it. And they immediately had arrested, within the next couple of days, they arrested people that were high up within the security forces as well. So something odd was going on there. And more material has come forward, more evidence, more statements that, as I brought up with the Siddur, he has aligned himself with the Iranian regime that's inside of Iraq as well. And he's completely 100% allied himself with Iran. And this makes this into one of the most dangerous spots for this to be happening, because the main concern, for instance, with Israel and many of the other nations is the fact that Iran is creating this, what they refer to as the Shiite Crescent. And Iraq itself gives the door that opens it all up. And that situation is continuing to build. Then we have what's been happening here in Syria, which was something that they've been warning about for quite some time, that they were concerned was about to happen, especially Israel, and that's Syria taking back its regions that border Jordan and the Golan Heights. There was a ceasefire that was put into effect between Russia, the United States, and Jordan, which is now technically speaking been broken. And they've been in there for the last week now, clearing out as many of those rebel groups as they can. Now, there had been rumors that there was a peace treaty signed between the Free Syrian Army and Assad's forces. Well, of course, as these treaties always seem to go, disappeared in almost no time. So they're back to fighting again in there, and it turns out that one of the biggest groups that is sitting in the midst of that border area of Jordan and the Golan Heights so happens to be Al Nusra Front, which is what? They're Al-Qaeda with a different name. There's been reports as well. Russia's been trying to stop Iran from gaining access to areas that are close to the border with Israel. There had been talks in the past that they had been trying to get Iran altogether completely out of Syria at the time of the end of the civil war that's happening here. And that's been a back and forth this entire time. It's a whole bunch of the atypical things that are going on. But in the midst of these agreements, Iranian forces at least agreed that they were going to stay away from this Jordanian and border and the Golan Heights. But then reports start to circulate that the different Iranian groups that are coming up into Syria, and this includes Afghanis and other folks from that corridor from Pakistan, Afghanistan, and some of these other areas that are aligned and trained by Iran's Revolutionary Guard, have been coming up into Syria, changing clothes so they look like regular Syrian military and fighting in the midst of this. So this is causing just absolute and complete chaos and is leading to just another major point of concern, because we know full well that Israel was in preparation for what they hope doesn't come to pass, but the training exercises for this and what they have dubbed this operation is the war in the north. It gets very concerning. I mean, when you go back and you look at the history, for instance, even of these several of the Lebanon wars that have taken place, anytime there have been wars up towards that region, up towards Lebanon, and that Israel has a really rough time. And the concern here is when you consider as well with the Golan Heights, this Assad, I have spent a vast amount of time looking into him, especially after the last chemical attack, because you have some portraying him as being, this great superhero and rah. But then you start digging into it and you find out that he is far worse than his dad, and he is completely off his rocker. And of course, when I look at stuff, I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. But when I start looking at information that's actually coming from other nations that are not inside of the United States, where they're bringing forth interviews and they're showing actual footage, you realize that, this Assad has some serious problems, and it's been brought to the table in the midst of everything that is happening here. So this is a dangerous circumstance that we have building here, especially when Jordan had just had massive protests and then, of course, forefront, Muslim Brotherhood was deeply in the mix. Why? Because they're deeply embedded in Jordan. And they're not necessarily a banned group like they are in many other areas. But they were caught in the midst of these massive protests because Jordan had taken out a loan from the IMF. And of course, what did the IMF do? What they always do. Their loans always come with major strings attached. So basically, the people of Jordan were working to pay their taxes and couldn't do anything else from there on out. They've had massive economic issues as is because of repercussions from the amount of refugees that they've taken in during the Syrian civil war and the other wars that are breaking out all throughout the Middle East has also caused major ramifications as far as economically for them. Not to even mention on top of it, Saudi Arabia pulled out any of its funding that it was giving to it because, well, that's what, as I call him, the brat prince, Mohammed bin Salman, does when somebody doesn't play according to his rules. And it's just that circumstance alone within Jordan is just unreal when you understand that, well, Jordan is associated with the Sons of Lot, its capital, Amman. It's not hard to see. But then we move inside of Israel. Because, of course, Gaza Strip is still in a very troubling state. A few weeks back, there was a supposed ceasefire agreement that was agreed upon between Egypt and Hamas in Gaza Strip. And, of course, Israel was not really holding its breath, knowing full well that that was also going to be an atypical ceasefire. And sure enough, nonstop missile barrages have been fired out of the Gaza Strip into Israel. This is just a continuing escalation inside of there. I mean, we go back to the same circumstance again. We're once again with Hamas, you're literally dealing with Muslim Brotherhood with, you know, a nice name taped on the top of it. It's still the same group. We obviously have Islamic Jihad that is working in there, and now it seems like there's a third player that is also causing all kinds of trouble. And this last week as well, we had, I believe it was Kushner and Greenblatt were out in the midst of the Middle East trying to push things forward for these peace talks. And of course, Abbas had nothing to do with it because, well, the Palestinians have stated after what Trump did with declaring Jerusalem as the embassy and everything else that was announced that day that he's a treacherous dealer. I mean, it does say the treacherous dealers deal treacherously. It's plural. And he can't be trusted to work with towards peace. Everything that flared up since that announcement, oh boy. I mean, when you have an entire administration that's running around rambling about the rapture and their full intent is on triggering the apocalypse, well, it's what we've seen play out. Turkey. Erdogan just amassed more power. As far as I'm concerned, he literally held a mock election because it was a mockery. It was a joke. There was nobody that was going to be capable of running against him, no matter what. And as usual, he would have suppressed any of the people that did try to run for that seat. So it was a joke. But this presidential election, the big thing about this is like I said, it handed him more power with the new constitutional amendments that he added in after the Gulen coup. So, of course, to make matters more dangerous, even in that circumstances, you've had Turkey is just nonstop sending warplanes into Iraq, hitting various Kurdish targets within the groups that they have labeled as terrorist groups. They just jump across the border, do what they want in Iraq, and it's no different than what they're doing in Syria. Because, you know, obviously there was this nice little tight alignment that was happening between the Astana Peace Accords, the Sochi talks, and all of that, where Turkey, Iran, and obviously Russia were all buddy-buddy. But then what happens is when the chemical attack took place earlier this year, which they have now confirmed, by the way, folks. This is something I had stated in the End Time Tribune shows. Until we have more facts on the ground as to what happened, I'm going to kind of stay silent on it. Well, an attack occurred, but the group, obviously, that goes in and monitors these things, the OSCE, I believe it's called, they can't really state who did it. That's more of a complex little piece. but they state that an attack itself did happen. And don't forget that Russia, a day to 2 days before that attack happened, warned that Jaish al-Islam was about to launch a chemical attack to initiate a false flag. And you have to really scratch your head going, they warned about this. But then to make matters worse, though, Russia turns around when the attack happened and they denied that any attack happened. The contradictions galore, or as I've called it, the fog of war. We know that attack happened. But when that attack happened, of course, Turkey immediately stood up against Assad. And then obviously everybody else that was aligned with Syria all of a sudden realized that Erdogan was doing what he does. Trouble in that whole circumstance, because, of course, what happened later after that? Well, he invades, comes into Iraq to start taking out the Kurdish factions, the terror groups, the ones that he considers terrorists. And then he comes in, he occupies, stays. Syria goes, leave. He says, no. So what has he been doing on top of it? Well, in Idlib, they have been bringing over all of the terror-related groups and rebels and sort of pushing over that way to whatever they seem to be doing with these terrorists that they're putting on buses and moving on. I mean, that's almost the infamous question, where are they all going? But he's taking them in to his new little proxy army he's building. Talk about one explosive, dangerous premise that is all in of its own. Well, that's essentially where it leads. And I mean, there's obviously been many that have been concerned about Turkey is going back into this Ottoman Empire mindset. And with the way, because there was on top of it, there was another huge article that came out of multiple Israeli sources last week that warned about the fact that Turkey was mobilizing people inside of Israel, their own people on top of it, to stir up controversy and trouble at the Temple Mount and all kinds of other troubling odds and ends, because obviously he has been calling for different moves against Israel, condemnation and threats of every scale imaginable. And there was another point I had here on the top of my head, and I can't remember it. So I'll hand it back over to you, Matthew, here for a bit.
All right, let's take a look at some financial news. This just came out this past week that flush with savings from lower tax bills and profits from growing economy, big U.S. companies are spending a record amount buying back their own stock. Stock repurchases hit $189 billion in the first quarter for the S&P 500, according to the preliminary results from the S&P and Dow Jones indices. That tops the prior record of $171.9 billion set during the summer of 2007, just before the Great Recession struck. If you need a hint, you ain't got a clue. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what else to tell you. I shared this particular article when it came out on my Twitter. I searched around, looked for news to, see who else was covering it. Nobody. They're as silent as sin, all your watchmen. Now, let's take a look at what Harley-Davidson did with all of their tax cuts. Well, just amazing. They just announced that they're going to export all their jobs concerning making Harley-Davidson motorcycles outside the U.S. because their taxes are going to go from 6% all in one fell swoop, 31%. And they're calling it the only sustainable option. Let me tell you what that translates to, ladies and gentlemen. Let me give you a clue, okay? You would want all those factories that's overseas to close down so that all Harley Davidsons would be made in the United States so that all of our children could have jobs, right? No, that's the exact opposite thing they're going to do. Exact opposite thing they're going to do. And Trump knew this. Oh, let's not blame it on him. The entire government of the United States knew that was going to happen. They all knew it. I mean, let's talk about some of the worst layoffs in 2018. We'll just go down the list. eBay, General Mills, Mid-Continent Nail Corporation. Because, of course, here, let me just read this and explain it to you. Because I know all about what happened back in the mid-'80s in a town near me when they all shot down. There was a massive rash of suicides because there was no jobs. But anyway, Mid-Continent Nail Corp is the largest nail manufacturer in the U.S. The company has been hit hard by the 25% tariff on imported steel. Let me give you a hint. Since when did the United States ever need to import steel? I'll tell you, never, not ever. All those jobs were shut down and sent overseas. But like I said, what should happen is not what is going to happen. And all your government knows that. The Democrats, all the Republicans, they know exactly what's going to happen. And if you think that all of your elected officials don't understand what was published in the Seattle Times headlines, you really are daft. Let me read it again. Stock purchases hit $189.1 billion in the first quarter. That tops the prior record of $171.9 billion set during the summer of 2007, just before the Great Recession struck. But you need to understand, they're not applying the ratio needed for money and dollars to then due to inflation. Oh, that's off the charts, ladies and gentlemen, because $171.9 in 2007 isn't worth as much as it is today. So the differentiation there between those two numbers is really grossly understated. And if you think let's just talk about all the elected officials in Seattle. Oh, they know exactly what's coming down the barrel because somebody's done pulled the trigger. This was the trigger being pulled right here. This is direct evidence that the click has already been heard. It's just that the boom hasn't exited the barrel yet. Now, let me make sure you understand what I'm trying to say. The American people are stupid. They actually thought that Trump was campaigning and wanting to work for them, and he wants America first. That's why he's raising tariffs. You've all been hoodwinked. Nobody's ever going to open more factories here because the workers are worth less than the kleptocracy members' pets. Just so you know, their dog is worth more than an American high school graduate. And that's a fact. That is a fact. So the plan was always to do exactly what you're witnessing right now with Harley Davidson. That was exactly on the plan, and you get it both barrels, don't you? But most of you probably really don't mind because you don't love your kids anyway. I mean, I just mentioned one town I used to live by locally. The massive suicides that took place after all those factory workers were laid off. And, you know, why doesn't anybody ever talk about what happened in, like, let's say, Detroit? When it completely collapsed, they kept it out of the news, kept it out of the news, kept it out of the news. You didn't do anything then. And all those elected kleptocracy members, they remembered what you did. Nothing. You did nothing is what you did. And that's what you accomplished. That's why right now, let's take another look at another headline. This is from the Washington Post, of course. Abortion foes play down possibility of immediately overturning Roe versus Wade. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're a Christian and you're a Republican, you're an idiot. By the way, on the great day, the great white throne judgment, God's going to ask you why you voted for a bunch of God haters. Make no mistakes about it. He is going to ask you. And all you Democrats, don't think you're all back of the bus. Oh, you're not. He's going to ask you why. But anyway, this entire article has been worded before anybody ever said anything about it. Don't you realize that? Here, let me read the first paragraph. Leaders of the abortion movement said Thursday that they were in no hurry to overturn the landmark Roe versus Wade abortion rights decision, saying they plan to stick to their longstanding strategy of pushing for incremental restrictions despite the tantalizing prospect of a more conservative Supreme Court. You bunch of idiots. If you think everybody don't know this is the exact time to launch a full-scale assault against the murdering of babies, you shouldn't be in politics anyway. You're clueless. I took psychology in an institution of higher learning and absolutely aced it, as a matter of fact. On my exams, I never missed a question, just so you know. This entire article is designed to get you to sit down and shut up and feel defeated before you ever stand up. Because these leaders that's in charge of which abortion movement was this actually? You notice that they didn't say? Wow, if you read the article and you have a degree in psychology, you'd start laughing 4 paragraphs into it. Let me explain something to you. It's about time I did this because I do a lot of work for, the Rotary Club. A lot of Jews that I know. I do a lot of organizing in Mexico. So I know a whole lot that you don't know. And you'll never know because you don't care. That's beside the point. Me and Brian talked about it when it happened, about the Catholic Church when it performed a mass exorcism over Europe. I'm going to read the opening diatribe there, and then I'm going to explain it to you. The Catholic Church performed a nationwide exorcism of Mexico to help the country get rid of its demons. The extreme violence, high number of abortions, and criminally associated with drug cartels prompted the church to carry out its unique kind of exorcism. This entire article is a lie. It's a lie. Every Catholic in Mexico thinks that every time a child is aborted, a demon is released from hell. So they kind of didn't explain that to you, did they? Now you can do cross references on when this article took place. None of them tells you that. But when I got rabbis screaming in my ear in Spanish, and I have to tell them to calm down, I don't understand Spanish, asking me, why is it your religious right aren't talking about this? Religious right? Holy cow. The religious right in America? The church is quadriplegic. The most you're going to get out of them is maybe a right cheek. And I mean, these rabbis thoroughly upset that we don't do anything about it. You know, we could help them. We could help them because the Mexican people are Catholics. Of course, nobody wanted a law passed legalizing abortion. And you're not ever going to be told the truth. But I have been. The rash of abortions in Mexico is from people from the United States going to get them. And people from Europe out of country. Just like you can go to Mexico and get your teeth done real cheap. Well, rich people just take their whores south of the border and get an abortion. Nobody knows it. Their wives don't know it. Of course, their wives, they're whores too, so it really don't matter. But yeah, the God-fearing people in Mexico know exactly what's happening and why it's happening. Well, Brian, back to you.
So you get to take those areas that I've been a little bit silent on lately. Folks, this, for crying out loud. Look, contrary to popular modern day belief, as people run around saying that nationalism is a good thing, loving your country, patriotism, wake up. It's that simple. And everything being brought up here concerning, for instance, these things happening in Mexico with them gathering up these children and throwing them in cages was all a direct result of that. Okay, nationalism's not a good thing. Nationalism led to World War I, led to World War II. Somehow, get a clue. I mean, really. I mean, most of these crusaders, because I don't refer to them as Christians or not. Sorry. The Bible refers to them as Nicolaitans. I've dealt with these people face to face to face since 2001. It's a psychosis. They don't care about anybody but themselves. And the Bible warned us about people that were going to be lovers of themselves. Well, that's exactly what they're doing. Look at our current society. You know, it's just ironic. It's ironic when you consider what we've been working on here in the background. And when you understand what transpired in 1947 here in the United States. We've done a program on this on the Bands of Time YouTube channel about American prophecy. It is end time Babylon. It is the harlot. I'd advise going and watching that episode if you don't know what we're talking about, because it's right there in the Greek. You're going to see it in broad daylight. And most people try to tell you America's not in prophecy. Oh, yeah, it is. When you consider the strangeness of what transpired there in 1947, they called forth a small group of people with one person at the head of it, called forth the harlot. Gave a very disturbing little prophecy in the midst of it, too. Because when you paid attention to what was stated in that working, you're going to realize it was telling us and warning us we better be watching the ball right as we speak. Yeah, our last election, the two candidates, it's in there in broad daylight. But of course, I don't hear anybody running around talking about that when they bring up their infamous, the Trump prophecies. Well, yeah, this time was prophesied about, folks. There's no doubt about that. Yet what role is being played by this nation? You know, you have people that need serious help overseas, and they contact the churches here in America, and you know what they tell them? Usually nothing. Or they don't respond, like I said. Or they say, no, we can't help you. But then they go and build great big multi-million-dollar buildings and run off and buy 3-4 Learjets. And then they run around talking about health, wealth, and prosperity. They've got the nerve to tell you that if you're having some kind of financial or health issue, that God must hate you. That is the spirit of Antichrist. You see, they're more concerned with themselves, that they don't even care what is happening to these people in these other nations. Mexico, for instance. Let me relay one of my, the exact words of a friend of mine that passed away several years back after he came back from Mexico. Because when he drove over the border, the guy that was with him that met him at the border, because he looks and he sees a body in a ditch and he's like, get used to it. That's normal here. Those cartels are out of control. People don't realize that these people are actually trying to escape from real world circumstances as America sits, as it always has, isolated, acting like a bunch of spoiled, rotten brats.
Can I interject something here real quick?
Oh, go for it.
You remember how I talked about 2007 earlier? And we just beat the big corporation buying back their own stock. Remember that, Brian? I mean, I just mentioned it. Well,
yep.
Let me tell you about the Mexican elections 2006, because this all started in December 11th, 2006, because that's when the brand new Mexican president declared a state of war on the drug traffickers. And now, just so you all know, January 2007 is when it really all got started, because they captured the head of the Gulf Cartel and did a very strange thing. They extradited him to the United States. and the American Christians are so consumed with their with their Super Bowl halftime show, you never put two and two together. I know all about it. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, you really don't know, do you? You really don't know. Ladies and gentlemen, you can't put two and two together. You see, because you didn't know when abortion was made legal in Mexico, you didn't bother to look that up. That's 2007. Ladies and gentlemen, the Mexican, look, I got all this information from rabbis down south of the border. I've had very good relationship with them, with two of them, since I got out of an institution of higher learning, because I was in contact with them because of their professor friends down south of the border. I've known all about this for 10 years. I ain't heard the American clergy say anything about it. You want to know why? Because the clergy in the church in America is quadriplegic. Look it up. I'm telling you, I don't need to look it up. I was told when the things were happening. Mexican people were very afraid. Well, how can the Mexican government declare war on the cartels? That don't make any sense. They are the cartels. And as soon as this thing started, they started capturing the criminals and sending them to the United States. The Mexican Christians know exactly why Brian just described what he described. And all this started in 2007, right before they crashed the economy. There ain't no such thing as an American Christian, and there's no such thing as a Mexican Christian. There's no such thing. And if you think there is, you don't have to worry about going to heaven. You need to think about something else. And maybe that's the point. You're so dumb, you don't even know that the Bible never says you're going to heaven. That's actually a very bad thing. God never says that. He says he's going to bring back those that have died with him, and they're coming here to planet Earth. And it's amazing that the Christians in America don't realize there's no such thing as an American Christian or an Australian Christian or a New Zealand Christian. There's only Christians. And I'm here to tell you, I ain't never voted. That's a fact. Because those who raised me, they feared the Lord their God. And they instructed me never to cast my lot for the wicked. So ever since I graduated. It has only taken me, even back then when I had to go downtown to the courthouse and get the voting records, it never took me more than a couple of days to figure out, there ain't no candidates that are Christians. So I'm just telling you, just so you know, God is going to ask you who you voted for. And those of you who claim to be part of the clergy or watchmen, he's going to ask you why you all still have all that crap up on your websites back in the archives. I just looked at 3 today about Obama being the Antichrist. He's going to ask you about it, man. Just so you know. And all you women that prance around with these Christian Watchmen site and you've got everybody thinking that you're a man, he's going to ask you about it. Just so you know. Looked at 2 of them today. Those aren't men. They're lying. That's not their name. Them are women. Now, you're probably wondering how I know that. Well, I had got a listener he's pretty well off. And he had questions about these 2 people that he was sponsoring. Really, he sent me links to them. I'll look at them. Of course, I looked at him for about 30 seconds and I called him back. Nah, you need to check into it. Well, he did. Sure enough, the owners of the blog sites is not men, they're women. And he went ahead and got the full meal deal. He paid for their name, address, whole 9 yards, even got where they worked. And when one of them had stopped working like 3 years ago because she just, she's just a hacker. She steals money off the internet and he knows all about it. He asked me and I'm like, no, don't prosecute her. Oh, by God, she's got it coming. The only reason why we ain't got this show on the roads because old Matthew ain't got the start gun. Because I'd have done pulled the trigger. But yeah, he was pretty mad. I told him, no, don't worry about it, man. She got it coming. I mean, I really am the one that just informed you about this chain of events with abortion coinciding exactly with the war on the drug cartels in Mexico. Really? Do you know why you don't know that? Because you think the Super Bowl halftime show is important, and that's pathetic. Now, I have been, and presently, directly addressing not the sheep, I'm addressing the sheep's so-called watchman. He's coming, and you better warn him that he's coming. There was another news article that come up this week, and it was pretty disturbing when I looked at it. It's got astronomers baffled. And let me just read from this headline. Astronomers see mystery explosion 200 million light years away from space. Supernova or exploding stars are relatively common. Really? That's new to me. Anyway, the one that they just observed is 10 to 100 times brighter than ordinary supernova. And this really has them worried. That is a pretty serious supernova explosion, ladies and gentlemen. Just so you know, you probably should go take a look up Paul LaViollette's research on the superwave because, well, he's already did the documentation off of another supernova that was witnessed, and he's proved his theory. But let me bring us closer to home. The other day I did a broadcast with my son, and we were talking about celestial events that happened when it occurred over Basel in Europe. I didn't have time on that program to share the details of both of those events. I only shared the one, but the other one I kind of kept in my back pocket because the constellation that stood over that city during the exact time those celestial phenomena was taking place, was the constellation Hercules. And guess what? This new supernova, the one that's 10 to 100 times more powerful than normal supernova, is where it came from. Now, let me say it one more time. I've been addressing the so-called watchman. You better tell him he's coming. And when he gets here, he's not going to look for the sheep first. He's going to look for you. Just so you know. Brian, back to you.
Well, I guess that's where we roll back around. You know, it's ironic that we have so many of these major events that are taking place in these varied spots throughout the world, and yet at the same time, it's rather shocking that you have certain groups within the self-proclaimed, self-dubbed watchmen, as I've stated 1 billion times in the past. Why do I state that? Because they self-appointed themselves. Got together a bunch of money, jumped in to the saddle to do their own thing, build their own following in that way. Didn't work through the way that the Lord has set things in place. You first have to serve before you're going to be put into those places. And yet, that's just it. They buy their way in. And when you look at the current condition of even what's happened here within this administration, is we have had a full-blown theocratic regime take the helm. Now, what does that mean? Well, what is a theocracy? They attempt to rule over a group by religious means. No different than what the Calvinists were doing. Or to give a better example, for instance, take a look at Mussolini. Which, ironically enough, that's why people are so concerned in Italy right now. You have this current administration who has stated in broad daylight that the reason that they're doing what they've done in Israel with the movement of the embassy and all of it was to, quote unquote, bring about the rapture. You have them on record stating that Mike Pompeo during his CIA hearings, or not CIA hearings, but his hearings for being put as the head of the State Department, actually after the fact, they became highly concerned by this, asking, why in the world do you keep going on and on about this? Folks, their ideology, their mindset, well, the destruction of Israel has to come about so they can be, quote unquote, taken up into the air. Matthew has stated 1 billion times, it's not rapture, it's relocation. If you don't understand what I mean, take a look at Revelation 12. Take a deep look at Revelation 12. Yet this is the sole intent of many of these people that are in the highest echelons of the governing body. Of course, and it's kind of whips back around to what I was bringing up with Turkey before. I mean, right now they're in the midst of, it's been announced that they're going to sell them F-35s, and then they state they're not going to, then they say they're going to. Well, they're going to, because that's the whole gist of everything, is they continue to hand weapons into the hands of all these different nations, many of which are avowed enemies of Israel. Always have been. But of course, they're playing nice for the time being, when we know this is leading to trouble across the board. You know, for instance, one of the trump cards they're holding in their hand is Saudi Arabia, because they want them to amplify the Sunni and Shia divide. And we've seen in the last couple of months here, when Netanyahu, for instance, went out to the European nations, when he was talking to all of them concerning what's happening in Iran, and let me add a side note, by the way, apparently the European nations are not attempting to do anything to keep the Iranian nuclear program peace treaty alive. And already there was reports that came out this week that they are in the midst of firing up the centrifuges, the yellow cake uranium. It's already moving in that direction because Iran has pretty much figured out nobody's going to keep in this deal. So they're already going into a defensive posture. But when Netanyahu was out talking to the European nations, he was amplifying this Sunni-Shia divide, that's going to be the big point that's going to break out here in Syria. So they're banking on that. And yet a vast majority of these nations, like I pointed out before, when you understand how the Islamic Revolution broke out there in Iran, not to even mention its echo in the first Islamic nation, Pakistan, yes, they had their same thing break out at the same time, an attempted revolt where the United States Embassy, they attempted to take it over. Then at the same time, in that same year, all of this in 1979, you had somebody come forward claiming to be the Imam Mahdi and took a bunch of people hostage there. But we know full well that the strategy that's in play by the United States, other Western nations, and even Israel is to try to amplify this Sunni-Shia divide. And yeah, it worked to an extent, and to a very dangerous extent in Iraq, because folks, like it or not, the cause of the sectarian fighting, the division that broke out between the Sunni and Shia in Iraq, well, for one, the people in Iraq never recognized that divide until America decided to make them see it. You can see, this is documented, look into it. That caused sectarian fighting, but what was the worst monster that arose because of that? Because ISIS rose up out of that, and they came forward with a completely over-the-top radical variant of their own, where anybody that wouldn't bow down to their twisted Sunni belief system, I want to say it's Salafist off the top of my head. It's been a while since I've looked through that stuff, a couple of weeks. But they stoked that divide full force to the point of absolute insanity. This kind of pushing in this direction is so very dangerous. You know, and I've seen people that can't even put two and two together that are within, and look, this nationalist thread within the Crusader circle, they're all following revisionist history now. They're trying to tell you that during the Crusades, that the Christians didn't do anything wrong. They weren't the bad guys, even though all history that has been recorded from both sides tells you indeed it did. They've rewritten and tried to phase out the fact. I've seen people say, well, when have Christians ever been warlike and have ever perpetrated violence? Have we forgotten about the, for instance, the Protestant wars that were happening throughout Europe, civil wars with the Catholics, and, you know, we can even go in and talk about Ireland, all those wars. This has been a constant. So yes, your revisionist history, try to do away with the facts. The facts remain. And it's nonsense. And if you have bought into this revisionist history, like the infamous revisionist history that America was founded as a Christian nation, no, it was not. I mean, it's ironic. Matthew brought up the Plymouth Brethren in our last program on Pushing the Envelope. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Yeah, that's going to go into a different program, but let's just say an infamous character we've been speaking about. Oh, he definitely set out on a warpath against them because, well, they were responsible for his father's death. And when you begin to look at how within his health, wealth, prosperity, these dominionist movements have been so very infected by the occult, you almost begin to wonder if he was the actual architect. Because as Matthew pointed out in that program, yeah, folks, John Darby, yeah, they're behind the rapture. This goes into so many deep circles. This circumstance with Iran obviously has become very dangerous. Yemen, on top of it in the last few weeks, massive campaign was launched. By the looks of it, I just checked through the news sources, and they're in the midst of an infamous, what would you call it, ceasefire as well. But once again, we know how that works. 5 minutes. Somebody will come in and start dropping bombs like always. But Saudi Arabia, guided by America, because America's painting the targets. Okay, that war is being fought via proxy. Through them, we're giving the targets. It's completely raged out of control. Now, of course, we've got the Houthi in there that, by all accounts, do appear to be aligned with Iran, even though they deny it. But the problem is in this, I found this way back when the initial civil war broke out on Yemen, in the very day that the one solar eclipse in the midst of the Blood Moon Jubilee, that war in Yemen started during the one solar eclipse in the middle of them, which is bothersome. I mean, folks, for those of you that don't realize why Yemen's important, Queen of the South, Queen Sheba, this is common knowledge now in historical circles that that's where her kingdom was. This isn't even, to this point, nobody's denying this. One stage throughout time, many thought it was in Ethiopia, but now you'll look at the historical text or the newer, not Wikipedia. I don't trust Wikipedia, but for instance, Encyclopedia Britannica, things like that, they're just going to tell you flat out, Yemen. Queen of the South shall rise up in that day. Well, folks, big things have been happening in Yemen, and a lot of times nobody ever talks about it. I've got live UA map up in front of me right now, for instance, which is a really good little website, and you can even get an app for your phone. They keep you up to date on everything that's going on. For instance, Lit Up, we've got issues going on here in Libya. We have major things happening. I know Nigeria has had all sorts of things going on that have been coming up in the news. Sudan and Somalia have been coming up majorly on top of it. And it's just South Sudan, let's see. Yep, and it's the same story I saw earlier today. Rebel trade attacks as truce due to start. So many different odds and ends. Things happening in Pakistan and Afghanistan. This one catches my attention, though. We've been talking about in the Crucible, folks, there's a specific realm and region associated with the Prince of Persia. And it is not just Iran. Let me read this little blip, this little tiny headline. Pakistan and Afghanistan reach unique agreement on papers for the first time in history. Uh-oh. Any form of division that may have existed between Afghanistan and Pakistan on paper goes bye-bye. Even though that division has been sort of make-believe, if you understand what was happening with the Pakistani ISI, going back to 1979 and even coming forward, between Taliban, Al-Qaeda, all of it. It's all tied in so deeply. On top of it, we have a major event taking place here. Is this Pakistan? Well, they're essentially this river, the Jammu, 6 people stranded in Tawi River, rescued by State Disaster Response Force and Jammu Civil Defense teams yesterday. The river is flowing above the danger mark following incessant rain in the region. It's a pretty big event when it makes it onto this map because these usually don't cover weather events. And we've got things happening all over the place. I just don't even know where to start. This is interesting. Italy provided a private jet for Ali Mamluk to visit Rome in February. Mamluk oversees Assad's intelligence agencies and is under an EU travel ban. Or let's whip it back around. Let's talk about Lebanon. I brought up Lebanon before with Hezbollah. We just had this election not too far back. Harari kept his seat, obviously. but a vast majority of the governing body is now being run by Hezbollah. A few weeks ago, on top of it, it was announced, if you remember back to last year, when Lebanon's president Hariri showed up in Saudi Arabia, and lo and behold, suddenly he announces, I'm stepping down from the presidency. And everybody in Lebanon is going, what? Something was fishy. Everybody that was paying attention to it knew it. Because in that same 24-hour span, that's when Mohammed bin Salman had rounded up everybody that was rich, nailed them for charges of corruption, and the only way they could get out was to give a huge percentage of their money to them. And this was documented by multiple reliable news sources. Yes, I don't use conspiracies or tabloids or Zero Hedge or RT or Sputnik or whatever garbage people out there are reading. No, these were all verified. Well, a couple weeks ago, Francis Marcon comes forward and says, by the way, because he was the first one to visit with Hariri in Saudi Arabia, he let the cat out of the bag and said, yeah, Saudi Arabia was holding him prisoner. Oh, boy. Talk about an absolute act of war. I'll hand it back over to you for a bit, Matthew.
All right, you've been having so much fun. Just want to remind everybody of Operation Eagle's Wings. Now, just so you know, that was the relocation of the Yemenite Jews between 1949 and 1950, when 49,000 of them were relocated to Israel. Now, just so you know, this is what the American Wikipedia article says. Operation Magic Carpet. Operation Magic Carpet, widely known for its nickname, Operation Eagle's Wings. Let me flick over to the Hebrew version. Now, the Hebrew version only mentions magic carpet in its opening sentence. It says the term Operation Magic Carpet redirects here. For the entry of an American military operation, see Operation Magic Carpet. Are you mad yet? Ladies and gentlemen, you need to look up Operation Magic Carpet, and even though that really don't exist, that's fiction. The operation has always been Operation Eagle's Wings. You can go to any Israeli website, and they tell you that the operation's official name originated from two biblical passages. Exodus 19, verse 4. Ye have been seeing what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not grow faint. Now, why would your American clergy allow this American one? Let me switch back over to the American one. Not want you to find Operation Eagle's Wings? Well, they don't want you to figure out, ladies and gentlemen, that what Brian just told you is true. That's the Queen of the South. And all Israelis know that, and they wanted to make sure before anything got really going to get all their Jews out of the Queen of the South's kingdom. But like I said, switch it over to the Hebrew, and you'll see where the origin of that fictional term comes from. They just come right out, and it's in the first sentence. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you should send it away to your shepherd. I'm sure he knows Hebrew, and he can translate it for you. I mean, if you're paying him any amount of money in tithe, he better be able to translate the Hebrew for you. So, with that in mind, let's take another closer look, shall we? Now, this supernova, the simple fact that it was 10 to 100 times brighter certainly took astronomers by surprise. But apart from the brightness, the thing that really troubled them was the aspect of the explosion speed. See, because it reached peak brightness in just 48 hours. And all supernova observed takes weeks. It takes weeks. Now, in dealing with the intense blast, scientists say that it was composed of 16,000 degree Fahrenheit. That's the temperature of the cloud of energy. It expanded outward at 12,000 miles per second. It is very worrisome to them for a third reason, in that it is very bright in all the parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, and its spectrum is also surprisingly smooth, unlike most supernova, which have distinct absorption lines. Well, I would hope that third time is a charm for you, ladies and gentlemen. He's coming. Oh, no. Not Jesus. No, he's not the one coming. No, he who sitteth upon the throne. You can read it in Isaiah, Micah. Just pick one. Just pick one. They all say he is coming to get this show on the road. He's going to come to kickstart the tribulation for you. Yeah, that's what he says all the time. As a matter of fact, 100% of the time he says that. So, personally, I'm excited. How about you? But, of course, I always have had an itchy trigger finger. Brian?
Well, I just did. I've been strolling through some of the different odds and ends coming up on the flare-ups on the live map. You know, it's rather disturbing when you pull up. I just noticed they have one under the aspect of what they call the world events and map. When you go through here, it's got some very interesting little tidbits. Trade wars. You know, let's talk about that for a moment. Because I already did mention the aspect of the trade wars, but of course, has everybody been watching what's happening with OPEC? You see, there's been concern of what's happening here with the Iranian sanctions that are about to be put in place, that this is going to cause a whole massive amount of oil to be removed from the markets. And of course, Saudi Arabia is now claiming they're going to kick in, I believe it was 2 million barrels per day to try to balance this out. But of course, who knows? I mean, 5 minutes from now, that could probably change, because it seems like that's what's been happening since the big OPEC talks happened, I believe it was last week. And Iran was really trying to stand against everything that was going on in the midst of it, which of course Saudi Arabia was slinging its weight around in the midst of this. And everybody has pretty much knows that, well, Saudi Arabia is always acting via proxy with the United States. So we've had problems in the economic realm with oil. And on top of it as well, when the world markets were really hit, everything knocked into reverse because of all the trade wars. Within that time span as well, oil once again skyrocketed. Complete, as they call it, uncertainty. That's it, and that's pushing nowhere good. We've got all these circumstances happening all over the place, and it's difficult for me to try to stay on top of everything now with everything multiple different projects being worked on here all at the same time, plus trying to keep on top of every little tidbit in the news can be very rough. But at least through a preliminary scan each day, I don't see that things are getting any better. You know, and that's kind of the gist of it, as we've been covering in this program with the Crucible. You know, because I've noticed that many of your infamous eschatology folks out there have completely gotten ahead of themselves within the timeline, gotten themselves convinced that the Gog-Magog war is right around the corner, even though when the great day he who sits upon the throne has not happened yet, it's not where you need to be looking. We need to be watching Iran and the parallel events that are taking place with when Alexander the Great began his ride. And there are so many things happening as we speak that causes great concern when you see what is happening as things are heading towards that slow boil. You know full well somebody's going to pull something trying to bring this regime down. Of course, they know full well trying to go in and hit them via military force is not the way to do things. Everything with the way Iran has set itself up with its troops, it's vastly isometric warfare, aka guerrilla warfare. They know full well that different tactics have to be taken. Any kind of attack on Iran is going to lead to repercussions that are far outside of what at least your regular everyday people are going to understand. Because when you understand how deeply embedded they are all throughout varied parts of the world, with backing certain terror organizations all over the place, throughout the Balkans, Chechnya, you've got it going deeply into South America. They have a major foothold there as well. Obviously, Lebanon is kind of like a, as I've stated before, that's beating a dead horse. Everybody knows Hezbollah's connections. You have Hamas, you have Islamic Jihad, you have the groups in the Gaza Strip. Once again, it's come out into broad daylight, what they've known forever on end anyways, that Hamas is being backed by the Iranian regime. You see, folks, trying to bring about regime change in Iran is not that simple. Trying to attack them head on is not that simple. You know, and you begin to ask that question, is that why when you look at how the he-goat hits the ram of Media Persia, you literally understand that the ram is getting sideswiped. That's why it causes concern when you see these protests breaking out along the Iraqi border. When you have the Iraqi leaders stating, we're very highly concerned that a proxy war is about to begin here in Iraq and make its way straight into Iran. And everybody don't forget what happened back in shortly thereafter 1979 with the Islamic Revolution in Iran, because that's when the Iraq war with Iran started. It was being backed all by the West, but of course, many nations were also behind the scenes intentionally arming Iran as well. Yes, Israel was involved on top of it. We know full well that America was involved. The Iran-Contra scandal. There's all kinds of details that go into this. In part, they had hoped that they would be able to solidify connections with that regime and maybe bring about some sort of a mutual understanding to stop things from being troubling. Of course, that didn't really pan out. You know, and we have announcements that North Korea is reinitiating and adding on at lightning speed to its nuclear weapons facilities. And we have reports that Iran has suddenly started reignited their centrifuges, the yellow cake uranium, which is one of the primary elements needed within nuclear weapons. So much for, oh, that's right. See, everybody's sitting back going, the peace treaty. The peace treaty. No, 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 no. What it states flat out is when they state peace and safety, then swift and sudden destruction. And we see these wheels being set in motion. We have this eclipse coming up here in July that has had massive ramifications every time it has happened throughout history. Even the precursors leading up to World War II. That's the whole point. When you look at the precursors leading to World War I, you look at the precursor leading to World War II, and then you look at our current state of affairs as history has completely gone into a full revolution as it repeats itself. You even have America sitting in an isolationist stance, just like it was in both wars. That's not coincidence. Things have gotten dangerous within this nation. I mean, everybody, folks, they've literally allowed the door to be open for these other nations now to initiate quite openly their nuclear weapons programs. And yet have we forgotten what happened last year as the defense budget? It kept getting cranked up even higher and higher and higher and higher. And they changed the protocols for the use of nuclear weapons. They started refurbishing all the ones in their possession, in the United States possession, not to even mention manufacturing new ones, as even a little while back, Germany is checking to see if their planes that they currently have can fit nuclear weapons on them. And did everybody forget? Didn't they take him serious? I mean, Trump literally stood up in front of the world. You didn't have to have a tabloid or worry about that the left wing was making this up in their propaganda. He stood there and stated, why do we have nuclear weapons if we don't use them? That's a very frightening premise. I mean, so much for their infamous doctrine of mutually assured destruction. By making these moves and these actions, well, talk about letting the genie out of the bottle. I kind of said it that way on purpose, but then again, you'd have to know what a genie actually is. Or a djinn. Hand it over to you there, Matthew.
Yeah, I guess I've said my fill for the night. It's absolutely amazing and troubling, and I know a lot of people get upset when I'm really sharp and to the point, but tonight was for those watchmen, because they all listen to us. I mean, who else you going to ask? But, you know, let's talk about some good stuff. Yeah, let's do that. Wow. Johnny's kind of upset that we're not live on the French radio network, Bri. Sorry, excuse me. Me and Brian's going to be making a new show as a gift to Johnny. We just talked about it last night. It's going to be along the lines of Daniel's Court. I'm not quite sure if that's going to be the name of it yet or not, but we're doing all kinds of new stuff, going different directions, and I guess I upset Brian the other night. He thought I was, by what I said, I was blaming it on him. No, it's not him at all. I thought I made myself clear that I found myself deficient. We have to start covering the fringe topics, get back to it. That's where the real help is needed. So we need to get back to giving interviews. I'm going to start. I did my first interview the other night with L.A. Marzulli from Acceleration Radio. Had a blast with him. Had a really good time with him. Go check out his blog site. Of course, he does his for free, too, just like I do. lamarzulli.wordpress.com. Aaron and I put together a blog for him as a guest post. Gave it to him. You might want to go check that out. So we're doing that, the Paranormal Palavar. And, of course, I and my son are doing Christian conspiracy theory. That's on the Fringe Radio Network, too. That's a gift to Johnny. So this one that me and Brian's going to do is also going to be a gift to Johnny. So we don't get those views. Brian and I don't. Those go to. Somebody said something to me the other day that I'd made a playlist on my YouTube channel. No, that's Johnny's playlist. I just made a list of his videos. So if you listen to mine, the views are going to go to him. I'm not going to do that to nobody. So that particular show, but Brian and I will continue to do this, the End Time Tribune. That's not going anywhere. It can't go anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere. But yeah, you'll see a list of new shows on my account, and Brian's got the account. That's what we're broadcasting live now too. But I guess Johnny's pretty upset that we weren't broadcasting live over there, which, you know. Brian is putting together the Bands of Time back together. Like I said, the default aggregate. Brian is doing that on End Time Tribune Media. And I was just looking back in some of my old drives to see if I could get some of those old videos from way back, the beginning of the End Time Tribune, to get to Brian so he can put them over there. But it's going to take me some time to find them, if I even have them, because most of the backup drives, of course, were lost in the barn fire.
I've actually got those videos here, so they're all backed up on my Mac.
What? You mean the videos before we and I ever met?
You forget that we didn't start doing videos until I went out there because we had to jerry-rig it together with duct tape.
No, yeah, I did video. That was my first YouTube channel that got marked offensive. Yeah, those I might have some of those of some of my backup drive. That's from 2010. I had like 55 videos. So I don't think you have those, but I might be able to find them. But all aggregate.
I was talking about the videos we did.
No, the ones I did before you, I'm hoping to find them so you can get them up there on End Time Tribune Media or wherever you're going to put them. But we're trying. I mean, we're headlong because the plan is, ladies and gentlemen, Brian and I are going to start doing speaking engagements. In order to do that, we had to reformat. We don't need people thinking that, we just cover end time topics, because I certainly do not. Most of my correspondence is strictly with Hebrew and Greek at the university level. So that's why I switched it over to According to the Scripture. So you can go to that WordPress site. You can see where I stand and my beliefs. I don't have a lot of time to work on it as far as writing, but I will. Everything's in flux right now. I just got a new job. I'll be working 12-hour shifts. It's going to rotate. So it's going to, rotating shifts like that. It'll be a week-to-week basis as to when I can do broadcast now. But anyway, we're in a great big flux, and that's what we're planning on doing. And that ties in with this being a local ministry. I'll be able to go around to the local churches. It's time for me to, it's time for us to go, live and local. So that's why all this is being reconfigured, redone, revitalized, shall we say, as Brian and I get our second wind. And there's some things that, just some things within the past 48 hours, me and Brian were discussing with text that has names that is really troubling, that could only point to this period when right now. But I don't know how deep I feel comfortable going with some of that stuff, but we've got all kinds of things on the back burners that we could do, ladies and gentlemen. I have endless supply. Pick a chapter and I can do it. But Brian and I have said so many times that we were going to do this, we were going to do that, and things happen and they get put on the back burners. Well, me and Brian has a lot of catching up to do, no doubt about it. We still have to get through Revelation with WI2C Radio, and what we're going to do after that is the Apocalypse of Isaiah. So, and after that, we'll probably do, I don't know, maybe Daniel, who knows? Maybe we'll do some of the minor prophets, I don't know, but WI2C Radio needs to steamroll forward. I don't know when we're going to get the first broadcast out for the Fringe Radio Network for Johnny. We didn't even talk about that last night. But, we're steamrolling forward in high gear. So Brian's going to it's his plan. Tonight's another test. We tried testing the live feed the other night, but he eventually wants to go to live video. And we can. We just got to get those ducks in a row. I don't care one way or the other. So Brian wants to do video, so we're going to do that. I don't know what channel that's going to be on. I don't know if he was wanting to stream in to YouTube or whatever. I'm not sure what he's got plans, but, I'm game. So if you want answers on that, you're going to have to ask Brian. I don't know how that's going to work out. I don't care, just as long as I'm not the one pushing buttons, because every time I push a button, I get a little box that pops up on my computer that starts counting down. So I'm, when it comes to that kind of stuff, there's no way I can do it, and everybody knows it. So got lots on our plate. Brian, why don't you do a shout out to Johnny and let him know when we're going to do that first show on Fringe and what that's going to be called and all that, and then bring everybody up to speed one more time. Repeat where they can get all of our stuff.
Well, to start with the second one first, the vast majority of things are going to be going through the Bands of Time. As far as any video work we do, it's going to remain there. The End Time Tribune Media is going to be sort of a backup channel and is going to hold stuff that we're not going to put on the Bands of Time. So that was sort of the premise of End Time Tribune Media, is that was the media outlet of that aspect of things we're doing. So we'll have to decide what goes over there and what goes over to the Bands of Time. And that's between those two. You can find the endtimetribunemedia.com is the website for that. And then the bandsoftime.com is the website that is going to be tied into, well, everything that's associated with that name, which means a whole lot, because this ties into a plethora of things. It has everything to do with time, has to do with history, and even within time, setting the properties in proper place of the timeline. You know, we're looking at a pattern right now that is enough to blow your mind. Because when you look at Daniel 9, for instance, the standard English translations are going to tell you 70 weeks, but when you look at the Hebrew, it says something altogether different. And it states 70s have been determined. And then after 62 70s, if you get my drift, it's not weeks. There's a different calculation happening in there. And when I began to sit down and look at the factors and started spinning this through, all of a sudden I began to realize that the Lord has encoded birth cycles into this numerical equation. And when you start locking those cycles in, some very amazing things begin to show themselves. But there's other variables within the factors as well. Other cogs in the clock, so to say. These other repetitions start playing out in short order. I mean, for instance, one of the things I'm looking at now, at least, well, it's being benched a little bit for the time being, but a specific isochronal pattern that happened that does lock into Daniel 11 to a degree, and even into Daniel 8. Because, for one, well, we had the reemergence of the Persian Empire with the Sassanids. You know, a lot of people try to tell you that Parthia was the Persians, and they'll tell you themselves flat out, no, it was not. And that's where things get confusing. But you also had the reemergence during the Byzantine Empire of the Macedonian Byzantine kings. So you had a Macedonian flare up again as well. And it's just unbelievable when you look at those patterns and you realize the similarities of past events and how each one of them layers out in its own right. There's so much that goes into it. It's absolutely unbelievable. But I mean, this even goes into what it is that we're going to be working on for the Fringe Radio Network. What I brought up before, because as I stated, those Magi, Daniel's court, there's a lot of mistaken identification with who those Magi are. And a lot of the confusion comes in when people pointed at the Parthians and automatically said that they were the Magi, that was the Zoroastrian Magi. But let me remind everybody that the Magiphonia that Darius the Great initiated when he seized that throne. Magiphonia essentially breaks down to the slaughter of the Magi. Okay, this is written of in their text, and it's even referenced in the text of Josephus, that this event indeed did happen. And when they took out the actual Magi, the Magi that they set up, well, they had the religious ideologies, of course, were tied into this, but at the same time, they were more or less set up as also sort of a diplomatic portion within the governing body. They didn't really work the way the actual real Magi did. And I had literally stumbled into unlocking all of these things concerning who the Magi really were. But part and parcel with that, this is where we come into Daniel's court, because there's an entire grouping of people that are listed there with Daniel at that time. And it's very ironic when you study the actual areas where the Magi actually came from. Lo and behold, you find the rest of that court also came from those same areas. And it gets even more interesting because there is a major portion that ties into this, because they were also guardians of Eden, the Magi themselves. Not to even mention guardians of another place. This is a program that we had wanted to do for years. But we have to go into some territory that is going to make it very hard for people to almost understand at first glance, because there's some very famous people that end up being involved in the string of events with the Magi. And once you can see it, it's enough to blow your mind. And there's top academic scholars out there now that are professors in academic institutions that have brought this work forward. So this is being backed in the academic institutions now. So that's going to be the gist of that show, and it's going to tie into every correlation with, as I've stated, with Daniel's court, not to even mention the fact that when the Magi come out of that time, you can see how it is that their belief systems had completely been changed by Daniel's act of mercy for all of those in Daniel's court. Because if you take note, he went out of his way to protect them. At first glance, you're kind of going, why? What in the world? Then after a while, it starts to make sense. You know, and I know Johnny had pointed that out several times in the past on the Iron Show about that very correlation between the Magi and Daniel's court and everything that transpired there. And oh yeah, it's major. And even when you begin to realize that there are Chinese records that state that the Magi's last place that they knew where they were at was in Antioch. Well, what does the Bible tell us about where the first Christians were at? They were in Antioch. Why did I bring that up? Who were the first Christians? The Magi showed up there and immediately worshiped Messiah. So when you have Chinese records confirming that that's where they were at as well, and you know full well that the Magi were the first Christians, that takes it up to a whole new level. There's a lot of people that have begun to realize that this part of the world itself is so vastly important in the scheme of modern history and the scheme of ancient history, and has been completely overlooked for a long time. When the walls fell at the end of the Cold War, all the archaeological information started to come forward. And it is just enough to blow your mind. With that said, I'll hand it back over to Matthew here for the last few seconds, hoping I explained everything I needed to.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, look for big stuff on our plates. Somehow we got to do another Christian conspiracy theory tomorrow, because me and Aaron's got to get that up on Sundays. Brian and I may do something again tomorrow. I don't know. All dependent on his schedule, my schedule. I don't have to work Wednesday. Let's see. I work Monday. I work Tuesday. I don't have to work Wednesday. On the 4th of July, I'm off because all the other employees want to work because they get double time. So I know I have Wednesday off, so we'll probably certainly do something Wednesday. So it's going to be in flux, but we will just continue to pump things out. But there's not going to be a regular schedule. There's just not. We will, because from this point forward, I know I have to work next Saturday. So look for it. We're just going to keep cranking them out. I mean, every time we get a chance to do something, we're going to do it. So we're going to keep rolling. We're not going to stop. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, God bless, Godspeed. Bye.
Thanks for joining us. God bless.